The purpose of my presentation today, though, is about making sure that all of you on the line are the healthiest that you can be. This presentation is really designed to help you, because I know when you're healthiest, you're able to help job seekers in the best way possible. So whilst some of these strategies might apply to job seekers as well, I've really focused it on making sure that you have all the skills and resources in your toolbox to be able to manage this time of uncertainty, and particularly as we know that it is a 1 in 100 year event, so it's not something we've experienced before. So whilst I get started, I'll bring on to my first slide, which is just letting you know that feelings of anxiety and worry are quite a normal response. We all have anxiety and we all have worry. Where we find anxiety becoming a problem is when the level of risk that we have in a situation does not match the level of anxiety that we have about the situation. So if you can see my hands here, where anxiety is problematic is when our anxiety levels increase over the genuine level of risk. And one of the things that's been happening in our media in the last couple of weeks, and it's recently shifted, which is positive from my perspective, is that the media has been constantly telling us all about the level of uptake or the rise in incidence rates of the coronavirus within our community and within the world. I guess that makes us feel somewhat at risk when we keep seeing that the incidence rates are rising. Earlier on, a couple of weeks ago, I tried to find out information about the people who had unfortunately passed away as a result of the coronavirus. And that information was really difficult to find. So we had this event going on where the media was taking over the messaging that we were all receiving, talking mostly about risk. And not surprisingly, it led us all to feeling quite anxious about our level of risk. What we need to do, I guess, as frontline staff, and particularly in the helping profession, is to make sure that we understand the genuine risks that we have in the population at the moment, and not be overly influenced by the way the media is responding to this event. So some anxiety and worry is normal, but we need to make sure that we take stock of that. So today is a little bit about taking stock of, does the level of risk that we have at the moment in the community match your response to where it's at? Now, stress and anxiety have a very similar reaction in our body. There is a body reaction that we have, there's a mind reaction, there's often a behavioural reaction, and there's an emotional reaction. And you can see from this slide that there are different types of reactions that people get from stress. When I was delivering this presentation recently, somebody asked me how you know if you have high levels of stress. And stress is a feeling, so it's a completely personal experience. That means that you are the best person to tell me, even though I'm a psychologist, you're the best person to tell me whether you have high stress, low stress, or medium stress. But what's really important to remember is that all feelings are on a spectrum, so they're not black or white. It's not I've got anxiety or no I haven't. It's definitely a progressive level of anxiety that we would all have. And sometimes I like to think about anxiety and stress as being on a bit of a thermometer where 100's our limit and 0 is the least amount of stress that we might be having in this particular event. So I'm flipping between the words stress and anxiety, but only because I have very similar reactions in our body and our psychological response to those. What's really important for us to recognise, particularly as we continue to work, is that there is a positive amount of stress and anxiety that we should have from this experience. And if we look to the slide now, you can see on this horizontal axis here that low stress, if we consider that on my analogy before, at 0, and high stress at 100. And the other axis here is showing us our performance. So performance, if we think about that, would mean how productive we are at work, how we perform in relationships, how we perform at home as parents, or how we perform with our peers. You can see this slide shows you that there's an optimum level of stress or anxiety that's important for us to achieve our highest level of performance. It's almost about 25% here on this normal curve. So 25% of stress or anxiety would lead to our highest peaked performance here. When we get to 50% anxiety or 50% stress, you can see that our performance actually increases a little bit here. And it's the optimum level of stress or anxiety to achieve performance. However, when we get down to this other side of stress and anxiety, you can see that 100% anxious leads you to quite low performance over this side. So this is my favourite slide, by the way, in this presentation, but it's quite an interesting slide because it tells you that some level of anxiety about our current situation will help you to perform better. But too much anxiety or too much stress about the current circumstances will lead you to underperforming at work and also at home. So what do we do with this then? How do we work out, firstly, if we are over the threshold for anxiety, and I'm saying that the threshold is about 75 out of 100. If you're feeling more than 75% stressed or more than 75% anxious about the current situation, there are some strategies that you'll need to put in place to help to give you some resources to get back into that performance zone. So the model that I'm proposing today that we all consider is the Thrive model. And this is a model to help you to build your individual personal resilience during this time. So Thrive is an acronym, and it stands for having good time management, having helpful thinking, being reasonable about the current situation, increasing your connectedness during social distancing, looking to your values and making sure there's an opportunity for enjoyment. So let's start with the first one, time management. So it's not surprising to many of you, and I'm certain this is a part of the day-to-day work that we do in employment services anyhow, is that we need a to-do list and a prioritising list. We need to contain our work day as well. If we're working from home, then we need to make sure we contain what is work and what is home activities. And your day is going to need to probably be broken up a little bit. Setting up a good workspace at home is also really important. Having the opportunity to not have clutter in that space and dedicating that workspace just to work will help to make sure that you're psychologically on point when you're sitting down to do your work. And again, it brings me back to that performance zone and making sure that the level of stress and anxiety in your life is less than 75 but more than 25. It's often the reason why we tell people not to do their work on the couch at home in front of the TV, because that's the time where we want to relax our bodies and decrease the stress that we have. So finding an optimal space at home is really important. So I'm not going to go too much more into time management because I think it's somewhat self-explanatory and I think it's a general practice that you're already doing. But let's talk about helpful thinking. That's the H in this. When we think about helpful thinking, and I mentioned before that risk needs to equal the level of anxiety that you have. The current thoughts that we're having are definitely related to some factors that are going on in nature and some factors that are going on for you individually. So firstly, what's the chance of and probability that I might get contaminated? What are the probable impacts if I do? I'm a young and healthy person, so would that actually impact me? And what about is it quite severe for my family or for my others? Would there be catastrophic consequences should that impact me? So those types of evaluations are going on in our minds without us even thinking about it. On top of that, we also have this sense of personal responsibility around the current circumstances in relation to our ability to control this. How do we control this if we're practicing all the proper hygiene and sanitisation practices? How do we control what's going on in the world at the moment? We obviously also have concerns for our older relatives, and we have some concerns for other vulnerable people in the community, and our job seekers are in that space. Previous experiences, if we've ever had any other previous experiences, that would be affecting our perception of risk. And also the grief associated with our current circumstances. Life as we know it will probably not continue in this way moving forward, and we know that to be the case, particularly in the next couple of months. But what will the world look like at Christmas? There is a level of grief that we all feel about losing the old way of doing things. So all of those factors contribute to how much we perceive we're at risk in the current uncertain circumstances of the world. But what I want you to consider about this is the way that we might be able to manage our perceptions of risk through helpful thinking. And I'll just explain what this model is. It's the ABC model, and it talks about a particular event that's happening, like the outbreak and the coronavirus, the thoughts that you might have about that, and particularly in relation to your level of risk, and then the consequent feelings, and how that then might lead you to behaving. This is a good one here. If some people I'm talking to are saying to me the thoughts that are going through their minds are, what if this happens to me? What if I get sick? I can't cope with all of these changes that are going on in the world, which is leading them to have these particular feelings of anxiety, sadness, and stress. I'm sure you're not surprised to know that those types of negative feelings then lead to other negative behaviours such as avoidance, overeating, sometimes drinking alcohol excessively, and other types of negative behaviours that we generally see. So the helpful thinking model is really important for you to recognise what particular thoughts you're having now in relation to the current events. So I'm just going to give you a moment to think about that for yourselves. If you had to complete this exercise and fill in the particular event we know, but what are the thoughts that are going on in your mind? And don't let anyone tell you that that voice in your head is something else. We all have that voice in our head, and that's the one that I'm asking you to think about right now and find out what the script is that you're saying to yourself, because that's certainly leading to some follow-up feelings. And should those follow-up feelings be anxiety, we need to be thinking about those a little bit more deeply. So I'll give you a moment to think about that. I guess the thing about helpful thinking is to recognise whether or not those particular thoughts that you're having in the column B are helping your current circumstances. If they're not helping, then there probably is an opportunity for you to, reframe those thoughts, or to think about it from another perspective. And some people call it the glass is half full, the glass is half empty. But if you thought about it from another perspective for a second, you might be able to change that thinking, which would lead you to having eventually different feelings about the current circumstances. So how does this fit together? Well, it fits together because if our particular negative thoughts are, I can't cope, or change is happening too rapidly, or I'm really worried about my parents at this time, and that's leading to feelings of anxiety, which are more than 75 out of 100, then we need to go back to those thoughts and see if we can try and make them more helpful so that we can reduce the levels of anxiety and stress that we have in our lives at the moment. Because we need to be operating in that performance zone in order to maintain our own personal health and our performance at work for the people and job seekers that we're working for. So helpful thinking, I'm quite passionate about, and exploring that for yourselves is important. But let's move on to reasonable, because time's getting away from us. But reasonable is really about making sure that we stick to the facts. Let's not let the media get in the way of the facts. All of us on the line are in a helping profession, and that means we've got a responsibility and a duty of care to know the facts. I've put up some reliable resources there, but the World Health Organization often has the facts, and that's really important. The other important part about the facts is to make sure that we contain them as much as possible. The media's moved a little bit in the last couple of days to the things that the government's doing to help us, which I think is great, because we've stopped focusing perpetually on the increased number of cases. But during this time, it might be helpful to limit the time that you spend looking at the news and the media, to make sure that you're just gaining the facts and not being part of the hype. And obviously that means we're focusing our attention on what we can control and not what we can't control at this moment. The I in Thrive is increasing your connectedness. We know that when people are socially disconnected, they're more vulnerable to mental health conditions, and that is particularly the case for you guys. You know this because that's what happens with our job seekers when they're not working. A decrease in social connectedness leads us to wondering what our purpose is, leads us to being more vulnerable to other types of mental health conditions. So increasing connectedness as much as possible is really important. Today's webinar is a good example of how you can be connected to each other, but who in your family knows how to use FaceTime, and who do we need to teach to make sure in your friendship group that we maintain that connectedness? And it's not just going to be about a telephone call, it's going to be about seeing someone and seeing them smile and having all of those other reactions apart from the verbal cues we get from the phone. So making some time to understand who it is that you're going to reach out to, and I'm saying to people, who will the 5 people be that you'll consistently contact and make sure that they're safe? That's an important part for you to think about. The B is, what are your values? And I guess as potentially negative the situation is at the moment, what I feel is really great is that we've got this opportunity to reevaluate who we are and what we stand for and what our values are. And on this slide you can see some common values that people have. But if you're not living to those values, that's where a sense of uneasiness and negative feelings might creep into your day-to-day life. So stopping to reevaluate your values, stopping to make sure that you're the best version of you is one of the opportunities that we have during this time. Where people live their lives closest to their values, they're the happiest. And I want to let you know that happiness is a feeling, that is counterintuitive to anxiety and stress. So if we have opportunities to increase happiness, it will definitely help us to decrease those feelings of stress and anxiety. So think about what's important to you. What do you value? Do you value health? Do you value family? Do you value the caring responsibilities that you have? Is it parenting that you value? What is it that you value? And lastly, I'll give you the opportunity to start thinking about ways that you can still have enjoyment in your lives, ways that you can still have a laugh, ways that you can still have fun. Making sure that that's part of your day-to-day to-do list is really important. We say that most people during times of stress need to at least engage in 30 minutes of enjoyable activities. These are things that totally let you escape from the day-to-day goings on, and these are things that also allow us to release those really good hormones that we need to be able to smile. Obviously, eating a balanced diet, and we were joking at the office today saying Corona-19, I hope doesn't mean 19 kilos, but eating a balanced diet, we're not on holidays here. We need to make sure that our bodies are fueled as healthy as possible during this time to manage what's going on. Making time to rest is also important, and following some good sleep hygiene practices. I also feel that there are some really good resources online around mindfulness practices, and they're really helpful to use prior to going to bed to help you to get into that really relaxed state. So they're also there to help you. So to summarise my presentation today, Thrive really stands for making sure you've got good time management, having good helpful thoughts about the current situation, taking on board reasonable advice, not taking on board the media hype, increasing your connectedness. This is really important to make sure that we do more connectedness during this time. Taking stock of our values, because what a great opportunity to do that, and making sure we have fun. If I asked you to rate out of 10 in order of how effective you currently are in each of these 5 or 6 factors, that might lead you to developing a coronavirus resilience plan. And what I mean by that is, if already you think you're an 8 out of 10 in time management, what would get you to a 10? What do you need to do today to get yourself to a 10? In relation to helpful thinking, how do you think you perform there? Are you normally a very helpful thinker, or do you tend to lean on the side of looking at reality thinking or somewhat pessimistic thinking? If that's the case, what do you need to do to get to a 10? Coming back to reasonable, what do you need to do to limit the good information that you need to get about the facts of the current situation? What do you need to do? And I won't go through the remaining factors, but I think you get the point here. It's almost like we need to make sure all of our Thrive resources are fully stocked during this time. I've got here for you, any of you that are interested in it, is to do that evaluation for yourself. It might be that you also do that evaluation with your partner or your family at home. Some of us are also trying to homeschool, and so these types of conversations are the kinds of conversations that we might want to be having with our children. I do have some other quick slides I want to move into about talking to children for those of us who are parents. What's really important during this time is that the children know something is going on at the moment. And I don't want you to be afraid to discuss what's going on with children. Particularly important to make sure we dispel any myths that the children might have about coronavirus. My 7-year-old was telling me that jokes were already starting in the playground 2 weeks ago when someone had a day off school that they had coronavirus. Now, I don't think she knew what that meant back then, but the kids are talking about it. So it's really important that we don't just ignore children in our lives and what they're feeling at that particular time. We need to reassure them that they are safe. That's really important. And I've heard people talking about children becoming excessive cleaners and making sure that we manage that appropriately moving forward. Because as you're aware that excessive germ phobias do lead to obsessive compulsive behaviours, and we need to just moderate this time as being temporary for children and important but temporary. So there's some other tips on the screen there, but I think I'll leave the rest of that for you guys to read. My last slide is really about making sure that you're a role model for your children, and limiting media exposure for children at this time is probably really important. That doesn't mean not giving them any exposure, it just means limiting it and not making coronavirus the only conversation that occurs in your house. So that's about all from me. I wanted to leave you with those 5 strategies for making sure that you're the healthiest you can be, because certainly when you're the healthiest you can be, that's our best opportunity to help job seekers to find jobs. And for those job seekers who you're working with who are already in jobs, I bet they're feeling lucky. So your performance is really important to making sure that they remain in work as best as possible. So that's about all from me. I might move over and see if there's any questions that have come up. No questions, that's always good. Chats, any chats? Can't see any questions, but I might just ask you all, are there any questions that you'd like to raise with me? And I'll try and answer those for you now. Can't hear any questions. Maybe I've spoken too fast. I think I might turn over to Nunzia in a moment, but I might also just add that next Wednesday at the same time, I'm also going to be presenting information on upskilling and increasing your effectiveness of post-placement support, which I'm really passionate about because, as I mentioned before, I think for those people who are in work now, we need to keep them in work for as long as possible. And we know that work provides a source of mental health relief. So we need to make sure we're supporting people as effectively as possible during this time. So I'm going to catch up with you all again this same time next week. And it's a really good opportunity for us to socially connect, which is the I in the Thrive model. But it's also an opportunity for you to gain some new skills in a different format. So thank you everybody for listening, and thank you for your feedback. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Nunzia, for the opportunity. Did you want to close?